Do you get frustrated when you set goals and don't hit them? Because I know I do. But here's what I've learned in the midst of it all. Usually, it's because we've set ourselves up for failure. Now, here's what I mean by that. We set unrealistic goals. We put so much pressure on ourselves to reach those goals in an unrealistic time frame, and we forget to check in with God to find out what He wants us to do. Today, I want to share a conversation I had earlier this year with Joe Harris of the Business in His Image podcast that addresses these very issues. We talk about how to set attainable goals with God at the center so that you can feel fueled up and energized to do the work set in front of you and make a difference using your gifts rather than feeling exhausted, burnt out, and ready to call it quits. Now, one thing I want to mention before we get into this conversation is that my Finish Line Goals program is a great way to break up that big, burly goal and make it practical within the capacity you have in the season you're in so that you don't get disappointed and quit on yourself. My big goal is to help you reverse engineer your goal so it's chunked down into smaller, doable tasks that lead to the finish line. If you're interested in learning more, head to redhotmindset.com/FLG to learn more and join us inside. Okay, I hope you enjoy this conversation with Joe as much as I did, so let's get into it. Hey friend, welcome to Pursuing Goals God's Way. Have you thought about finally starting that business now that your kids are older? Do you ever stay awake wondering how to mesh your passions into purposeful work? Do you have big, ambitious goals but feel overwhelmed or even unqualified to pursue them? Hey, I'm Gabe. Not too long ago, I longed for the confidence to start an online business. I just wanted to make a difference outside my home bubble using my gifts. But I kept telling myself that I wasn't good enough. I didn't know enough, and I didn't have enough time. Until I realized something huge. My kids need me to be their example, and they need to see me win. And yours do too. In this podcast, you will learn how to clarify your goals, plan with purpose, and ditch your distractions. If you're ready to make an impact and an income, all for the glory of God, then you're in the right place. As an avid runner, I believe life is one massive marathon. It's up to you to run your own race and to finish it well. So lace up those running shoes, pop in your earbuds, and let's do this thing.
Gabe, welcome to Business in His Image. It's so great to have you.
Thanks, Joe. So excited to be here and for the opportunity to bless your audience.
Yes, it's so cool how we met. I'll just give listeners a little insight into how we met, but I actually pitched myself to be on your podcast, and that just spiraled this beautiful collaboration between the two of us. But I'm just so grateful that, God put us in each other's paths and that we get to do this together.
Yeah, me too. I just think it's so cool because you were on my heart too. I had found you from one of my biggest clients, had you on her podcast. And I was like, ooh, Joe sounds like a really cool woman. I want to get to know her.
That is so sweet. And I think it's a testament of don't be afraid to put yourself out there, right? My husband, he always says, don't prejudge the outcome. So when you're looking to collaborate with other people or you're pitching yourself, don't prejudge the outcome and have a negative mindset of oh, this won't work or this or that. You just never know what God is going to do. So I think that's such a great testament to that. So as we jump in here, I want to talk about this concept of setting attainable goals. I love this topic so much. How did that become a thing for you? I'm using air quotes here. How did that become a thing for you? Where were you at in life and what was going on when you realized something needed to change?
Man, so much, right? So I have always been a huge achiever, always been very full, having multiple roles at all the times. But
Same.
yeah, exactly. And so when I got into motherhood, actually,
Mhm.
is when I started really having this longing of doing something for myself or just hitting a goal because I love being a mom. It happened sooner than I had planned, which is totally fine because it's God's planning.
Yeah.
And there's a lot. I mean, I could go in many tangents along the way. But one thing that I just wanted to do was I felt like I wanted to set a really big goal and figure out how to attain it. And I'm an avid runner. And so the thing I thought about was, well, I run marathons and I'd love to get faster. And it would be really cool to qualify for the Boston Marathon, which you qualify based on gender and time of your race. But the goal of that, this is why it was such a big goal for me, is because I needed to drop, I think it was like 50 or 55 minutes off my marathon time, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it was like a minute and a half or even more than a minute and a half per mile, which is actually a lot of time.
Yeah.
And so I went on this mission to like figure out, how do I put in the mental training? How do I put in the actual physical training to do this thing? And I did hit that goal my third time around. It took a few times, but I learned a lot of things along the way, and I learned how to do hard things. And that was the main purpose of this first goal, was to, one, kind of build a dream again, and to figure out how to do hard things. And the reason for it was because I said, then I can be an example for my kids. I can teach them how to have a goal and how to, go about pursuing it and attaining it. And one thing I like about the marathon is because you really can break that up into more attainable chunks. If you just see it as the full marathon, it's a lot to think about. Like, can I run 26.2 miles if I've only run, one in my whole life or whatnot? But when you break it up, you're like, oh, that means I need to run a half marathon. Oh, that means I need to run a 10K. Oh, that means that I need to run a 5K. And you start there, like you start with that first mile, and then you build toward that bigger goal. And that's kind of something I learned in the process of kind of attaining this one. And I knew if I could attain this one thing, then maybe, just maybe, I could do some other hard things in my life, even with career or just different things along the way.
That's really good. So, on a practical level, for those listening, how can someone measure the goals that they should be aiming for? Bringing this kind of back to their business and, of course, keeping God at the center of it. What would you say?
Such a good question, because a lot of times we look to the end goal. We look at that big result that we want. And I would say dreaming is a good thing. Like, we want to have these big goals, these big dreams, but it's really hard to attain them because we just can't see ourselves getting there. It's so far away from where we are right now. There's so much progress that has to be made, where having that big dream is really great, but then reverse engineering it in a way to make it more practical.
Yes.
Because that goal, like, let's say your goal is, I want to hit $100,000 this year in my business, right? Like, that's cool. But how are you going to get there? Like, that's a numbers goal, which you can't really control when that happens. However, you can control the things you do that will help get you to that point. And so we reverse engineer the goals and break it up into smaller, I call them stepping stone goals. So what do I need to do first to get to there? Like, what else? Maybe, so if it's $100,000, okay, well, I need to make $50,000, right? And then I need to make 25,000. And so break it up that way. But then also in that, I consider those like projects. So now, how are you going to work on that project? And that's where the planning comes in. You need to think about, what are those little tasks? What are those habits that I need to create in order to get to that point? And so it would be like, let's say, in order to hit an extra 1,000 in your business, you need an extra 5 clients or something like that. Let's just think about, what is it that you need? Well, you cannot force people to become clients. You can't force the revenue to come, but you can decide how often you need to reach out, or how many people you need to reach out to in order to make that happen. So let's say you need to reach out to 100 people a month for that. And you can just keep breaking it down to littler, smaller chunks to know, oh, well, I would only need to reach out to about 3 people a day. That's doable. I can probably do that in a half hour to an hour a day, right? So kind of breaking it up to make it more feasible. And the reason I like those kinds of goals is because you can measure them. Like, it's very measurable to go, did I reach out to X amount of people today? I did. Okay, well, I'm making progress. No, I didn't. Okay, that's okay. So, sometimes it doesn't happen, but then we can adjust. We can go, okay, what got in the way of that? We can really be able to pinpoint what's going on, what distractions are coming in the way, what boundaries do I need to set for myself to make time for my business goals, right? And so that's kind of a little bit of how I would break up something like that to make it more attainable. But then also to think about, you had asked about aligning it with God and kind of allowing him to lead. And what I like about this system is that you're not forcing things to happen. You're not making things happen. You're allowing them to happen through the steps that it's going to take, because we do need to be in action. We need to be in motion for God to do the work in us, to like shift us or to steer us, right? And so it's that and then just listening, just being attentive and attuned to where he's guiding you. Because like we just talked about in the beginning, Joe, you and I, how we got connected, that was a God thing, you know? And so it was just like listening to those small whispers or those steps, and just knowing that you're not going to be able to ruin his plans. Like his plans are going to happen no matter what. Even if you go the wrong direction, he's just it might just take longer, right? He's just going to steer you, but we just got to be attuned to that to say what needs to shift if something does.
Yeah, I love what you said about how we think so much about the end goal, like this big, huge mountain, right? Like, oh, I want to make X amount from, this service or whatever. And we haven't thought about the work that it's going to take to actually get there and the stepping stones, like you were saying. And so what happens is we're not doing what we actually need to do. We're not like putting in the same amount of effort that it's going to take to reach there, then get disappointed. And I've seen that happen in my life. I see it happen in others all the time. And that's when like I started having this mindset shift of, oh, if that's the goal, like this is what it's going to take to get there. If I don't have the margin for that, maybe I need to scale back the goal so that I can actually attain it, right? And it's so good what you said. God has such a great way of redirecting us. And I think that sometimes we can focus on perfection and doing everything right. I know I've struggled with that. And it's so comforting to know that as long as we are doing our best to follow Christ and stay in a relationship with him and follow his will, and we're doing what we can, we're not taking advantage of his grace, like we can find comfort in knowing that he will redirect us if he sees that we're going the wrong way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how you talked about the mountain, because that's one of the analogies I like to show, is because let's say your goal is at the top of the summit. It's up at the, 14,000 elevation. You have to get there. That looks hard.
It does.
But what's cool is we just think about it as a journey. It's all a journey. You are growing and changing the whole way. And there's going to be big rocks in your path. There's going to be challenges, but it's a matter of, pivoting and getting around that challenge, the giants that get in our way. But when you get to the top of the summit and you look back, you're like, look at how far I've come. I cannot believe I'm a whole different person. The thing is that's cool about that too, is you don't really arrive. That summit isn't the ending point. It's almost a starting point of something new or some other place God's leading you. Because like you said, we're not perfect. We'll never be perfect. I don't know why we try to be perfect, because there's only one who is, right? And that's good news for us, because we can just do it messy. We can do it imperfectly.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm curious to know, what does your goal setting process look like? Is there like a cadence to when you start kind of working on your goals for the future, and when it's time to sit down and write out those goals? Like, what are you doing? What does that look like?
Yeah, I have a formula called the Red Hot formula for setting and crushing goals. And it's a very simple process, because everything I do, I try to make as simple as possible. So it's 3 steps. And the first step is seeing it. And that is where I get to dream, or I teach clients how to dream. We come up with these big burly goals, or just write down everything that we could ever want to do, and then kind of sift through it, pray through it, see what really is standing out, and picking that big next goal. And maybe it'll be a couple goals, because you might have one in business and you might have one in health or in relationships or things like that. So it's okay to have a couple at the same time. The one thing that I always like to tell people when they're doing the planning, because you got to see it, the dreaming, the why, developing the reason behind it, because we're not actually going to take time out. We're not going to do something hard unless there's a big reason for it. And so that reason, I always like to say, what would change in your life if you hit that goal? Or what isn't going to change in your life if you don't hit that goal, right? So make it a bit of a deep resonating with it. But then that second step is actually the planning process. And planning is really important. Taking time to slow down and to create a plan is important to be able to speed up and get into action mode to hit your goals. And so the planning part is really where you take that big goal and you break it up into those smaller goals, the stepping stone goals I was talking about earlier. And then within each stepping stone goal, breaking it up even further into what habits or tasks do I need to do to hit this one goal. And then what I like to talk about is taking that one stepping stone. Don't look at any of the others. We're just looking at that one, and we're going to work on that one until we get there. And that's with the habits and the tasks. And it's like a little project. It's a mini project. And projects have a deadline. Like projects can get done because you're doing these like more realistic things, the things that are measurable.
Yes.
And then once you hit that, then we move to the next one. But before we move to the next one, you want to actually take time to celebrate and think about like, that's your result. And that's why I like to break it up too, because you can actually then physically see the results. Because that's the hardest part when you're looking at that big dream. It's harder to see it. So you quit on yourself a lot faster. When you have these mini wins along the way, it's easier to keep going. It gives you that momentum. Yeah. So
I'm over here clapping. Yeah.
It's so true though. Yeah. So that's the planning stage. And that takes a little bit of time, and it's okay to take some time with it, but we don't want to be stuck there, because the only way you're going to make something happen is if you do actually put in the work. Like you can't just think about it or talk about it. Like I talk about speaking your goals, writing your goals, doing all of that, because then it's going to seep into your spirit, and you're going to be, if the more you think about it, the more apt you're going to be to do something about it. Right. So it's not like you think about it or talk about it and then it's going to happen. That's just not the case. We have to put in the work. So the third step is to do it. So it's see it, plan it, do it. And do it is taking that plan that you've written, but taking it with flexibility. Now, I'm not going to say with flexibility to give you a permission to make excuses, but the flexibility is because, one, if we have God leading, he may change our direction in some way, right?
Yeah.
We need to be flexible with that. Or life happens, like emergencies happen. We have to have that flexibility to be able to shift when we need to. But we take that plan, we work it, and then we take time out to reflect on it, to look at what went well this week, what didn't go so well. You know, did I hit all the measurable tasks or habits that I wanted to do? Did I not? What distractions came in? What opportunities came? Do I say yes or no to them? Because opportunities sometimes look good, but they are more of a distraction than anything. And then looking at the next week, okay, what can I do? This distraction came. What could I do to alleviate that for the next week? Do I need to make any adjustments? This is where the flexibility comes in. What do I need to do next week to move myself a little bit further? And then one last thing with that is to, like we were just talking about setting goals. Like sometimes we set these big goals that are somewhat unrealistic. Well, the reason it's unrealistic is because we're not looking at the season we're in or the capacity we have, right? Especially as working mamas, we don't have that much extra time, right?
Yeah.
We have a lot that we're already giving. We're giving of ourselves to our kids. We're giving ourselves to our husbands. We're bringing we're bringing people places. We're, maintaining the home. We are doing a lot of things and building probably relationships outside of that. And so we need to actually give ourselves grace to know, what am I capable of right now? What can I commit to? And that's a part of the action as well, because you need to be thinking about that. Like maybe this next week is going to be really hard. So maybe your goal, you only do one thing toward it, or you maybe don't even do anything toward it that week, but that's an anomaly. Like you're going to put that on the back burner for the week because you have a hard week. You don't want to stress yourself out, right? I'm all about limiting that hustle.
I love that. I think that last part you shared about just being realistic with the season you're in, I think that's really a key component of setting goals that are attainable. Because if we have this rigid mindset, we're literally setting ourselves up to be disappointed and hard on ourselves.
Yeah, we are. And here's an example of that. So I've been in business for a few years. My business is going really well, but it's not exactly where I want it to be. But part of that is because I do client work, and I do kind of put some of what I do personally on the back burner a little bit, because I want the client work to get done well and have that time. So I have a certain amount of time I invest in that, right? And so one thing that I have learned over the years is, one, I have a really good business because I have really good client work, but also I had to change my expectation of when it was going to happen for me, like when I was going to hit that goal, like the financial goal or the different things. And I looked at it and go, when do I really need that to happen? Well, honestly, I don't need to hit that goal until my kids are out of the house. So I have like 8 years left. And I go, wow. Now I look at it and go, 8 years from now, I can totally see that. Even if I have to work a little slower on my own stuff, but I can totally see that in 8 years. I can totally see that more before that. I can see that in 3 years. You know what I mean? So like when we look at it in that way, it's so much more easy to let go and go, oh, okay, I can do this.
Wow, that is so good. That is so good. I think that in our industry, we get a lot of that messaging of this can happen fast, right? We've been hearing a lot of that, and I think it's doing something to our expectations. Can you hit on that a little bit?
Yeah, and we can do it quickly, right? But I think a lot of times we have to look at, who are we listening to? Are they in the season we're in? Do they have 3 kids and they're homeschooling and they're doing all these things and they're working on top of it? Sometimes we hear from, single guys who did it overnight or did it, well, quote unquote overnight, because no one's an overnight success. It took years of training and growing anyway to hit that, even if you had that one collaboration that went well or that one client that broke everything, right? That didn't happen overnight. That happened in years of work. But, they're in a different capacity. They have more time to work. They could probably work on their business 40 hours if they wanted to, where we're probably trying to put it in 5 to 15 hours. You can't always grow a business that fast. But then also, I think our expectations of what it looks like, because people are like, oh, you can do this and you can do that, and you're going to earn $10,000 a month next month. On online business, like in regular business, if you look at brick and mortar business, you're in the red for years. Usually you aren't turning a profit for years. Online business, the great thing about it is that there is no overhead. Like there is no big overhead. Yes, you have expenses. You have subscriptions or softwares or things that you are spending money on, but it's so much lower that you hit a profit so much earlier. But our expectations are like, oh, well, people say you can do it, so let's do it. But that's just not always the case. We have to put in that work. We have to think about what is that goal, that next goal, and really have that stepping stone process, but also knowing that it can work. But again, it's like there is no overnight success. That's my biggest thing and motivator. Like it takes years for that success to come. Even if they've only, even if they've only been in business, let's say they were only in business for a few months and it did grow. They probably did learn in either their work before or they were in personal development for a long time. They were doing a lot of things along the way to get to that point.
Oh, I love that you hit on that, because I think we hear these success stories and I think, sales copy has a lot to do with it, right? Like this really good sales copy, and you're hearing like this amazing case study, and it's not that they're lying to you. Like, yes, that really happened for them, but what you're not seeing is all the behind the scenes, how much they've invested in themselves and their training, maybe in a coach, maybe in ads. Like we really don't know everything that they did. And so I think it's important to be careful and submit our expectations to the Lord. I know I've had to do that in my business. Just because the Lord told you to have this business and do certain things, that doesn't mean that the result is going to come in the time that you are expecting.
Well, you know what? God doesn't live in our time.
Exactly.
Right. And so his timing is perfect, but his timing is totally not our expectation. And so I've thought about that too, because people ask me like, well, how do I know when to quit? Because I don't feel like it's working. I'm like, well, have you had a heart to heart with God? Has he told you to quit? Because if not, then you got to keep going, right? Like just because it gets hard doesn't mean you should stop. Now, there are times when he does call us to stop or he calls us to something new. That's a transition, right? And so it's like we need to be and they're like, well, how do I hear his voice? Well, are you in the word?
Yeah.
Even if you're only in the word for 5 minutes a day, right? At least are you in the word?
Start somewhere? Yeah.
Start there. Start with praying for 5 minutes in your quiet time in the car ride. Turn off a podcast. I mean, I love podcasts, but turn it off. Turn off the music and get alone with him in those short times you have, right? You'll start being able to feel that, and you'll also get a confirmation in other ways. Like there is a difference between opposition that comes, right? Or confirmation. And you will see that confirmation. If you hear it, then just kind of study the word a little bit, pray with him, and see if there's another confirmation that comes. But I always just encourage, don't quit until you know that's where you're being called to. And it's not really quitting, it's pivoting. It's pivoting to that next right thing that God is calling you to.
Oh, that is so good. That is so good. There's a couple scriptures that come to mind. One of them is, it says, do not grow weary in well-doing, for at the right time you will reap a harvest if you do not give up. And then there's another one in Ecclesiastes that I love to reference about this. And it says, cast your bread upon the waters, and after many days you may see a return. And God has had to encourage me with that, because sometimes we don't see the fruit right away. So I love what you said about, like, before you give up or you stop doing what you're doing, like, check in with God and ask, are you even supposed to stop doing what you're doing? Or is this something where you just need to keep sowing and you're going to see that harvest in his right timing?
Are you tired of quitting on yourself and your goals? I get it. You've been hemming and hawing about a goal you want to achieve for a while now, and you know your life would be enriched if you could make it happen. But it's hard to justify taking time out for yourself when your plate's already full with work, kids' activities, home management, and everything in between. What if I told you that you could, in fact, work toward a goal in a stress-less, no-hustle way so that you can make an impact on your kids and that they need to see you win? What if I told you that you can create a personalized game plan that works in the season of life that you're in with the capacity you have without sacrificing precious family time? Let me show you how to think backward so you can spend less time worrying about where to start and more time taking action that works. My simple Red Hot Goals formula will help you create a personalized game plan that works for the seasons you're in and the capacity you have. You can work your goals into your lifestyle without sacrificing everything to achieve them. With the Red Hot Goals formula, you will be able to gain clarity that makes your dream real to you without worrying about how it'll all come together. Craft a simplified game plan that gets results in the season of life you're in. And take action that works, even if you have a limited time to make things happen. Are you ready to ditch the overwhelm and go after your goals in a stress-less, no-hustle kind of way? Then head to redhotmindset.com/FLG to learn more about Finish Line Goals and join me today. Again, that's redhotmindset.com/FLG.
I would love to hear from you as far as where to begin. Maybe someone has this big dream from the Lord. They have all these ambitions and things that they want to do to serve God with their gifts. But maybe when it comes to setting goals, they feel overwhelmed and they don't even know where to start. What advice do you have for getting started?
Yeah, I think that's one of the hardest parts in starting is just the overwhelm of it. If you don't know where to go, if you don't know where to begin. But the first step I would say is to write down that goal. So if you have something on your heart, if you have this desire, most likely it is coming from God if you are seeking him and if you are growing in the word. So write that down and then meditate on it for a little bit. See what comes up. Like, why do you feel like this has been pressed on you? Like, that why is really important to solidify what matters to you. Why would going after that actually matter? Because like we talked about, it's going to be hard. Nothing comes easy. Anything good is going to be hard. And so you need to have that starting point and that foundation of, this is what I'm doing, or this is what I'm called to, and this is the why. And sometimes kind of going down a little bit, I always like to say, well, ask yourself why. And then ask yourself why again, and ask yourself why again, kind of like a little kid. Just go why, until you get to that root, that point, because that is going to be the driver for you to do all the other steps, to actually create a plan and figure out how to get started. The other encouragement that I have for you, and then also post that, like, put your goal and your why up where you can see it, because it will be motivating for you, and it'll keep it in front of you. But then my encouragement is, you can learn anything. Like, you can find the thing that you need to start. So let's say your goal is to start an online business and you have no idea where to go. Well, write it down, figure out that why, and then, do a little search. Find somebody who resonates with you and learn from them. Like there's so many people out there who teach how to do online business. I mean, I help strategize that. Joe does that. So there's so many great resources out there. So find that and look for that one voice or that mentor who could be right for you, that coach, whether you are paying for a coach or you're just utilizing the resources they have, because there's so many free resources. And start there. Look for that first step. And then you can kind of go to that next step, and that next step, break it down as far down as you can. And also the other thing would be finding community. So depending on what that goal is, find somewhere else with people with similar goals, or at least people with goals, so that you can have that outlet to be able to either have an accountability partner or to have that encouragement or that support, or where you can kind of go, oh, I need to do this, but where have you guys done that? Or, so you can have those encouragements, you can have those people like, oh, I did that. Here's where you need to go. Community is huge in it.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. One of the things I implement in my group coaching membership, Disciples Who Dream Society, is I check in with these entrepreneurs and I'm holding them accountable. Like, hey, we talked about XYZ. Where are you at with that? How is it going? And I've noticed a difference in their response and just like the results they're seeing. And I've seen that happen in my own life. When I have someone holding me accountable, someone checking in with me and asking me how things are going, it just does something to you. And it's so motivating.
Yeah, it does.
I would love to also hear about boundaries. What are some signs that we might see show up? How can we tell when maybe we're going a little bit too hard, a little bit too ahead of God, and we're not involving him enough? Because there's such a fine line with having goals and wanting to be effective for the kingdom. And then there's that fine line of we want to make sure that we're not trying to do things for God without involving him. You know what I mean? And it's such an easy line to cross.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I will tell you, I'm the queen of not having boundaries. I'm a lot better than I used to be,
Yeah.
but I used to be a yes woman. Like I would say yes to everything. And so how you know that you are not good at boundaries is if you're stressed out. Like right now, take an assessment. Do you feel anxious a lot of the day? Do you feel like you have too many to-dos and you can't get them done? Are you laying your head down at night thinking about all the things that you didn't accomplish instead of like having some gratitudes and thinking about the win you had today? Like, what are you staying up at night? Are you not able to sleep very well? All those things are signs that you are running the race a bit too fast, or that you don't have those boundaries in place. And I will tell you, it's happened to me multiple times. It leads to burnout. And when we are burnt out, it's really hard to get going again. Like it does something to our body.
Yeah.
And it really, like you have to get back into realignment. It takes a lot more rest to get back instead of just having that rest along the way. So resting is really, really important when it comes to going after our goals. And I know that sounds counterintuitive because it's like, well, if I'm not doing something, I should, then I'm not going to be hitting it. But you need that rest period to essentially refuel yourself. And also the rest period, especially for like business owners, is where your creativity comes. It's also where God will be able to speak to you. Like if you have some downtime, then he can knock on the door and say, hey, Gabe, you're doing it wrong. Let's go this way, right? Or maybe you're going a little bit too fast. And so having that white space, very, very important. And it doesn't have to be like weeks off. It can be, start with 5 minutes a day. Let's take the weekends off. And so think about, and I like to talk about boundaries when it comes to goals. Think about the boundaries you want to have, especially in business, because our businesses can run our life, especially because we are the entrepreneur. We are the one who owns the business. So we think about it all the time. We love what we do. You're probably in business because that's what you love. You're passionate about it. You're passionate about teaching others about it or about doing the work that you are called to. And so it's really easy to just get stuck there. And I get stuck there a lot because people would say I'm a workaholic, but it's because I love what I do. So I've had to learn how to set really, really hard boundaries, and I'm getting better at it. I'm not a perfect at it. But one of my hard boundaries is I have a cutoff at 5 o'clock. I want to have the evenings off. I also want to have my weekends off. I feel like it is good for us to have 2 rest days. Now, sometimes I do, like if I'm in a launch or something, I might have to hustle a little more and I might have to work in the weekends. But those are kind of the hard cutoffs. But then also when you have these boundaries, you can go and look at opportunities and say, nope, I'm too full. I already have my limit of collaborations. We'll say, I already have my limit of how many podcast interviews I'm going to do, or I already have my limit of how many, whatever it is. So I'm going to say no, even though it looks like a great opportunity. But if I say yes to that, now I'm going outside my boundaries. I know my stress level is going to increase. My family is going to suffer, right? Because I heard this once that we as moms we set the atmosphere for our home. When we're stressed and we don't have peace, our family is not at peace. And so I think that's a really important key. If we're feeling like things are not going, like there's just no peace here, there's chaos, then something needs to give. And so I think those are some cues to how to, one, set boundaries, but then also how to see, am I going outside my boundaries, and what do I need to do to get back?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And when you're building a business, there may be a season or seasons when you're going to go extra harder. And that's normal, because I think that especially newer entrepreneurs, they hear people say, oh, I only work X amount of hours a week, or like, I don't believe in hustling and this and that. And that is true. But when you're first building up that business, you are going to have to put in more work and more effort. But that doesn't mean that it's meant to stay that way. And I think that whole concept of like not hustling and all of that is meant to be that's the norm. Like once your business is established and you're just living day-to-day life, that's what we're trying to say, right? But when you're first building up your business, you may have to work weekends. Like you said, you may have to put in extra hours, and that is okay. It's just really important to know the season that you're in. As we're wrapping up here soon, I would love to hear from you, because this is the Business in His Image podcast. So I want to know, what does that mean to you, doing business in His image?
Yeah. Well, one thing it meant is I pivoted. I heard God say, I mean, he's not vocal to me. I wish he were. That would be really easy. But it was like, your target customer isn't the target customer I want you to. I wasn't in the entrepreneurial atmosphere here. I was like talking to moms, and I loved that. And I was like, but I love this. I don't want to shift into it's saturated, right? Like you get these words or these limiting beliefs, right? But he's like, no, that's who I want you to speak to. So doing business in His image means I'm willing to be obedient to what I feel he's calling me to at any given step. I feel like when we don't do something right away, that's disobedience. And so it's trying to be obedient in all the things, knowing that we're going to do it imperfectly. We're human. We're going to make mistakes, but then figuring out, how do I get back into alignment? Doing business in His image to me means that I'm spending time with Him. Like that's really important. And there have been seasons where I have put that aside because I'm like, I don't have time. My plate is so full. I don't have time for this. So I'm going to set that aside. Well, that's the most important part. If we don't have time for even like a few minutes of prayer or a few minutes in the Word, right? If I don't have time for that, then my priorities are way out of whack. So part of doing business in His image is having my priorities align with my values and with biblical like principles, even like just being aligned in the Word and being aligned in life and business with my faith.
Oh, I love that so much, Gabe. Thank you for your transparency in sharing that. I have a very similar story as you. All this stuff that people see me doing now, like this podcast, the Lord literally told me to do it. I was not going to do a podcast. The Lord led me to get into coaching and courses and all of that, but I didn't have a plan to do that, because like you, I felt like it was saturated and I didn't want to be that person. But what I'm seeing is that, and I just want to encourage anyone listening with this, like if the Lord has put it on your heart to do something that you think is saturated, you think, well, there's already other people doing that. Don't worry about that. Like Gabe said, it is literally disobedience for you not to walk into what God has told you to do. If God has told you to do something, there's room for you. It doesn't matter. Like the Bible says straight up, there's nothing new under the sun, right? So just because you see a lot of people doing something, that doesn't mean that there's not room for you. God will pave the way. So you just need to trust Him with that and submit it to Him.
Yeah, I love that because there is nothing new under the sun. You might think your thing is new, but it's
Yeah,
probably been done before, but it's never been done by you the way that you can. And if you can affect
absolutely.
somebody that I can't, amazing, right? We're doing this for God's glory. And so that's the thing. Your message is going to resonate with a certain people that it wasn't going to resonate by someone else who's already been doing it. Right? So
Yeah.
that's a huge encouragement.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like there's room for all of us at the table. It doesn't have to be a thing where like, oh, because this person's successful, nobody else can be successful. No, that's not true. There's millions and billions of people out there, right? So God has someone out there for you to serve that he wants to reach. So that's so good. Gabe, thank you so much for taking the time to give value and being on the show. It was such a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joe. This was such a fun conversation.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I had a great time and I hope you did too. Before we go though, if you resonate with this episode, please consider leaving a review on iTunes or sharing it with a friend as it helps grow the podcast. Also, if you're not a part of the Red Hot Accountability Club, what are you waiting for? It's a private online community away from the noise of social media that provides coaching, support, and encouragement as you go after your biggest goals in business or life in a stress-less, no hustle kind of way. Inside the club, you will own your own results, hold yourself accountable, and lean on others for support. If you've been looking for a simple, off social media way to grow, then this is it. Head on over to redhotmindset.com/RHA to learn more and join us today. Again, that's redhotmindset.com/RHA. And I can't wait to welcome you into the club. In all things I pray, you just run your race. I believe in you.